Imagine for a second that you are the Treasury Secretary of the United States. It is your first week on the job. The President calls you into the Oval Office and says he wants to visit Fort Knox. He wants to see the gold. He wants cameras. He wants proof. You smile and say, "Of course, Mr. President." Then you sit down at your desk and realize something. The last time anyone outside the government actually counted the gold was in 1974. That was 52 years ago. The vault has 15 compartments. In 1974, they opened one. Reporters were given 2 hours. Nobody matched a single bar to a serial number. Nobody tested purity. Nobody weighed anything. And every year since then, the official line has been, all the gold is present and accounted for. You are about to stake your career on a number that nobody has verified since before you were born. But the number that nobody talks about is not how much gold America lost. It is that 83% of what remains cannot be traded on a single international exchange in the world today. Welcome to the autopsy of America's gold. One, the greatest gold rush in reverse. To understand how America ended up sitting on the world's largest gold reserve that it cannot use, you have to go back to the moment when the United States government decided that its own citizens were not allowed to own gold. On April 5, 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 61002. The order made it illegal for any American citizen to hold gold coins, gold bullion, or gold certificates. You had 25 days to surrender everything to the nearest Federal Reserve Bank. In exchange, you received $20.67 per ounce. If you refused, the penalty was $10,000, 10 years in prison, or both. Adjusted for inflation, that fine is about $250,000 today, or holding a metal that your grandparents had carried in their pockets. The justification was straightforward. The Great Depression had shattered confidence in the banking system. People were pulling gold out of banks and hiding it under floorboards. Roosevelt argued that hoarding was draining the system of liquidity. To restart the economy, he needed control of the gold supply. Oh, he took it. Within months, roughly 3,600 tons of gold moved from private hands into government vaults. Then, 9 months later, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. This act did 2 things. First, it transferred all monetary gold to the United States Treasury. Second, it reset the official price of gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, a 69% increase. Think about the cruelty of that sequence. Citizens surrendered their gold at $20. The government revalued it to $35. The profit went to the Treasury. If you had refused to hand over your gold and gotten caught, you would have gone to prison. If you complied, you watched the government make 69% on your property in less than a year. By 1936, the Treasury had so much gold it needed a new building. Construction began on the United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox, Kentucky. By 1941, over 12,900 metric tons of gold sat inside, roughly 2/3 of all American gold reserves. The vault door alone weighed 20 tons. The building was designed to survive a military invasion from the eastern seaboard, and that was just the beginning. During World War II, as Europe burned, Allied nations sent their gold across the Atlantic for safekeeping. By the late 1940s, America held more than 20,000 metric tons of gold. That was roughly 75% of all the monetary gold on Earth. One country, 3/4 of the world's gold. There has never been a concentration of monetary wealth like it in human history, before or since. 2. The deal that ate the gold. In July 1944, while soldiers were still dying in Normandy, 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their job was to design a new monetary system for the post-war world. The system they built was elegant and simple. Every participating country would peg its currency to the United States dollar. The dollar, in turn, would be pegged to gold at exactly $35 per ounce. Any foreign government holding dollars could, at any time, walk up to the gold window at the Federal Reserve and exchange those dollars for physical gold. The logic was sound. America had the gold. America had the economy. America had won the war. The dollar, backed by 20,000 tons of shining metal, was the most trustworthy currency on Earth. But there was a problem embedded in the design, and a Belgian-American economist named Robert Trifton saw it before anyone else. In 1960, Trifton told the United States Congress exactly what was going to happen. For the system to work, the world needed a growing supply of dollars. The only way America could supply those dollars was to spend more abroad than it earned, to run persistent deficits. But as those deficits grew, the ratio of dollars to gold would deteriorate. Eventually, foreign governments would realize there were more dollars in circulation than America had gold to back them. And then they would come for the gold. Trifton described the contradiction with mathematical precision. Congress listened politely. Then they did nothing. And exactly what Trifton predicted began to happen. Through the 1950s and 1960s, the United States spent lavishly. The Marshall Plan, the Korean War, foreign aid, military bases across Europe and Asia, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society welfare programs, the Vietnam War. Dollars flowed out of America by the billions, and those dollars were claims on gold. Between 1950 and 1970, gold reserves fell from the equivalent $22.8 billion to $10.2 billion. In tonnage, America lost roughly half its gold in 20 years. Not through theft, not through disaster. Through the simple mechanics of a system that required America to bleed gold in order to function. President Eisenhower tried banning Americans from buying gold overseas. Kennedy imposed an equalization tax on foreign investments. Johnson literally discouraged Americans from traveling to Europe. None of it worked. The gold kept leaving. But here is where it gets interesting. One man decided he was not going to wait for the system to collapse. He was going to get his gold out first. 3. The general who saw through the bluff. Charles de Gaulle was not an economist. He was a soldier, a statesman, and a man who trusted nobody, least of all the Americans. By the early 1960s, de Gaulle had become convinced that the Bretton Woods system was a rigged game. The United States, he argued, enjoyed what French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing famously called an exorbitant privilege. America could print dollars, spend them around the world, and never face the consequences, because everyone else needed those dollars. In February 1965, de Gaulle held a press conference that stunned the financial world. He publicly called for a return to the gold and announced that France would begin converting its dollar reserves into gold. His reasoning was blunt. Gold, he said, does not change in nature. It has no nationality. It is the immutable and fiduciary value par excellence. But de Gaulle did not stop at rhetoric. He had already launched a secret operation. Beginning in 1963, under the code name Vidya-Guthe, France began systematically repatriating its gold from the vaults of the Federal Reserve in New York and the Bank of England in London. The operation was remarkable in scale. Ocean liners from the Compagnie Générale Transatlantique carried 25 tons at a time on 2 voyages per month. When the British pound came under pressure in 1964, de Gaulle accelerated the operation. Air France passenger planes began airlifting gold from London to Paris. Over 3 years, 44 boat trips and 129 flights moved 3,313 tons of gold back to France. Think about the paranoia of that. A head of state, in peacetime, secretly moving thousands of tons of gold across the Atlantic because he did not trust his own ally to honor a financial commitment. And de Gaulle was right. France's gold repatriation turned out to be one of the best financial decisions any government made in the 20th century. The countries that held on to their dollars instead of converting to gold watched those dollars lose 96% of their value against gold over the following decade. France got out. Almost everyone else got trapped. Meanwhile, the bleeding accelerated. Between 1958 and 1968, the United States lost over 8,000 metric tons of gold. The London Gold Pool, a consortium of 8 central banks spending billions to hold the price at $35, collapsed in March 1968 after the United States asked the British government to close the London gold markets on an emergency basis. Quick pause here. If you are finding this useful, consider subscribing. The economics they skip in school is what we cover every week. Hit the button. Now let us talk about what happened next, because it is the most brazen move in modern financial history. For the night the gold window closed. By the summer of 1971, the situation was terminal. The balance of payments deficit in the second quarter alone exceeded $3.2 billion, more than the entire deficit for all of 1970. Foreign governments were lining up to convert their dollars to gold. In early August, France reportedly sent a naval vessel to New York Harbor to collect French gold reserves. Whether or not a warship actually docked at the pier, the message was unmistakable. The bluff was being called. On August 15, 1971, a Sunday evening, President Richard Nixon gathered his closest advisors at Camp David. Paul Volcker, then with the Treasury Department, had briefed him on the gold losses. The math was simple. There were 3 times as many foreign dollar claims outstanding as there was gold to back them. If even a fraction of those claims were redeemed simultaneously, the vault would empty. Nixon went on national television and announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. The key word was temporarily. It has now been 55 years. The suspension is still in effect. In a single broadcast, Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and anything physical. The Bretton Woods systems were dead. Gold would now float freely on world markets. The dollar would be backed by nothing except the full faith and credit of the United States government, which, practically speaking, meant the willingness of the world to keep accepting pieces of paper with dead presidents on them. The gold price tells the rest of the story. At $35 per ounce in 1971, gold rose to $850 by January 1980. Today, it trades around $4,500. The dollar has lost more than 99% of its purchasing power relative to the metal that used to define it. And the 8,133 tons that America claims to still hold, they sit in vaults, technically belonging to the Treasury, officially valued at $42.22 per ounce. That is the statutory price set in 1973. The Treasury has not updated it. At market prices, the gold is worth roughly $1.2 trillion. At book value, it is worth $11 billion. That is a gap of over 10,000%, frozen in place for over half a century, and nobody in Washington seems interested in correcting it. The gold that cannot be sold. Now we arrive at the part of the story that almost nobody discusses. Assume for a moment that the gold is real. Assume all 8,133 tons are exactly where the Treasury says they are. Assume not a single bar has been moved, leased, swapped, or encumbered in any way. Heavy under those generous assumptions, there is still a catastrophic problem. Most of the gold in Fort Knox is junk. Not fake, not tungsten-filled, just impure. In 1933, when Roosevelt confiscated gold from American citizens, the coins they surrendered were roughly 90% gold. The government melted those coins down and cast them into bars. Those bars went into Fort Knox, where they have sat ever since. The average fineness of the gold in the U.S. Reserve is 916.7 parts per thousand, or about 91.7% pure. The problem is that the world has moved on. The London Bullion Market Association, the body that sets the standard for international gold trading, requires a minimum fineness of 995 parts per thousand for a bar to qualify as good delivery. The global standard is trending toward 999.9 based on documents released during a 2011 House committee hearing. Only about 17% of the gold held by the United States meets modern good delivery standards. 83% does not. Most analysis of Fort Knox asks the wrong question. The question is not whether the gold is still there. The question is whether it matters if it is. Audited for 70 years, valued at a price from 1973, and too impure to sell, this is not a reserve. This is a monument. France understood this problem years ago. The French Central Bank recently sold 129 tons of non-standard gold that had been stored in New York and replaced it with higher purity bars, kept in Paris. France upgraded. America did not. To refine 83% of the U.S. gold reserve to modern standards would require melting down and recasting tens of thousands of bars. It would take years. It would cost billions, and it would require opening the vaults, which, as we have established, nobody seems willing to do. 6. The audit that never happened. The last time anyone outside the government saw the inside of Fort Knox with any degree of scrutiny was September 1974. The Treasury opened one of 15 vault compartments to a group of congressmen and reporters. They were given roughly 2 hours. Photographs show politicians grinning and hoisting gold bars for the cameras. Armed guards passed metal detector over each visitor on the way out to make sure nobody had slipped a 27.5-pound bar into their trousers. It was theater. No bars were matched to serial numbers. No purity tests were conducted. No transactional history was reviewed. As one critic described it, a pep rally, not an audit. In the decades since, the Treasury has claimed to conduct internal annual verifications. Secretary Bessent stated in February 2025 that the gold was all accounted for. Steve Mnuchin, who visited in 2017, said the same thing. But these are internal claims, not independent audits. The seals on vault compartments have reportedly been broken and reaffixed over the years without fresh auditing. Some reports from the 1970s inventory process have gone missing. Early 2025, President Trump and Elon Musk publicly called for a full Fort Knox audit. Congressman Thomas Massie introduced the Gold Reserve Transparency Act, requiring an independent physical assay and inventory every 5 years. And Senator Mike Lee proposed a bill demanding an accounting of all gold transactions over the past 50 years. For a few weeks, it was the biggest financial transparency story in the country. Then Treasury Secretary Bessent said, "All the gold is there." Trump and Musk stopped talking about it. The media moved on. As of May 2026, in a recent interview, Trump said he still wants to visit Fort Knox someday. No audit has been scheduled. Think about the absurdity of that. The United States holds what it claims is the largest sovereign gold reserve on Earth, worth over $1 trillion at current prices. And the evidence that it exists in the quantity and quality claimed rests entirely on the word of the institution that holds it. Final thoughts. So what have we learned? 1. The United States built the greatest gold hoard in history, more than 20,000 tons, by confiscating it from its own citizens at a below-market price, then revaluing it for a 69% profit 9 months later. 2. That gold was used to back the dollar under Bretton Woods, giving America the exorbitant privilege of spending without consequences, until the gold ran out. 3. When the gold ran out, Nixon did not reform the system. He simply closed the window and declared the game over, temporarily. 4. What remains? 8,133 tons on paper, has not been independently audited in over 70 years. 83% of it fails modern purity standards for international trade, and the official U.S. government book price is still $42.22 per ounce, a figure so disconnected from reality that it qualifies less as an accounting entry and more as a punchline. 5. Every time someone in Washington suggests actually counting the gold, something conveniently changes the subject. The question is not whether America's gold is still in the vault. The question is whether we have built an entire global financial system on the assumption that it is, and whether that assumption has quietly become more important than the gold itself. The government took the gold at $20, revalued it to $35, used it to back the world's money for 3 decades. When the gold ran out, they simply announced that gold did not matter anymore. Every single step was perfectly legal. If you want to understand what happened next, how the dollar survived without gold, and what that means for your money today, that video is coming. Now subscribe so you do not miss it.